Did you know that 62% of people expect a gift on Valentine's Day? But some gifts come with a terrifying price? From chilling encounters with obsessed admirers to shocking crimes of passion, these Valentine horror stories will make you question if love is really worth the risk. Let's dive in. It still doesn't feel real. One moment, I was setting the dinner table, excited for a quiet Valentine's night with my husband, and the next, I was standing in the freezing cold outside a flower shop, staring at his empty car. The engine was still running, warm air pouring from the vents, but the driver's seat was empty. His phone and wallet sat on the passenger seat, untouched. The door was wide open, as if he had just stepped out and planned to return in a second, but he never did. The police didn't seem too alarmed at first. Maybe he just stepped away, they said. But why would he leave his car running? Why would he abandon his phone, his wallet, his wife? Hours turned into a night. The shop owner said my husband had come in, picked out roses, paid in cash, and left. He was smiling. Normal. There was no struggle, no strange behavior. He walked out that door, and then he was gone. Just gone. I stood there, clutching my coat, staring at the empty parking lot, my heart pounding in my ears. Something was terribly, terribly wrong. The police started their search the next morning. By then, the cold had seeped into my bones, and sleep was a distant memory. I was stuck in the nightmare of my husband's disappearance. His face was on every news channel, every social media page. Man vanishes on Valentine's night. I watched reporters interview the flower shop owner, saw the baffled expressions of the officers. No signs of a struggle, no evidence of foul play, no security footage showing anything unusual. He just disappeared into the dark. I retraced his steps 100 times in my mind. He drove to the shop. He picked out roses. He walked out. And then what? Did someone take him? Did he willingly leave? That thought made my stomach turn. No, he wouldn't do that. Something happened to him. Something bad. And yet there was nothing. No leads, no ransom note, no final message. Just an empty parking lot and a car with the engine still humming. I started to think maybe I'd never see him again. That maybe the man I loved had been swallowed by something unseen, something beyond reason. 3 nights later, my phone rang at exactly 3:07 a.m. I jolted awake, heart hammering. It was his number. My husband's name lit up my screen. I froze. My fingers trembled as I answered. Hello? Silence. Then breathing. Heavy, ragged breathing. Hello? Where are you? More silence. And then, a sound I will never forget. A faint scratching, like nails against metal. Then, a whisper. Not words, just a whisper. My skin crawled. Who is this? I demanded. No answer. Just more of that eerie, ragged breathing, the sound of something moving, something scraping. Then, the call cut off. I called back, over and over, but it went straight to voicemail. The police traced it to a cell tower near the flower shop, but that was it. No further pings, no sign of him. My husband's phone, which had been left in his car, was now active. And someone, or something, was using it. I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about that phone call, that breathing. It felt like a warning, or a taunt. I had to go back to where it all started, that parking lot. Maybe I missed something. Maybe there was something the police hadn't seen. So I went, alone. The lot was empty at that hour, just the flickering neon sign of the flower shop casting a dim, eerie glow. My breath fogged in the air as I stepped toward the exact spot where his car had been. The pavement was cracked, worn, ordinary, but I felt watched, like something was there, just beyond my vision. And then I saw it, a shadow. It was standing by the dumpster, tall and still, just watching me. My blood ran cold. Hello? I whispered. No answer. My heart pounded as I stepped back, but the shadow didn't move. It was human-shaped, but wrong. Too thin, too tall. My hands shook as I reached for my phone, but the moment I blinked, it was gone. Vanished, just like my husband. The next morning, I went back to the flower shop. The owner, a frail old man with tired eyes, looked at me with something I can only describe as fear. Please, I begged, tell me if you saw anything. Anything strange?" He hesitated. Then, in a low, shaking voice, he said, "Your husband wasn't alone." My stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" He looked around, as if afraid someone would hear. There was something with him, not a person. Not really. My mouth went dry. What did it look like? His eyes darted away. "I don't know. I saw a shape behind him. Tall, thin, and then he was just gone. Like he walked into a wall of darkness." I shuddered. "Why didn't you tell the police?" He swallowed hard. "Because they wouldn't believe me." That night, I received another call. This time, it wasn't his number. It was an unknown caller. But I knew it was him. I picked up, my breath catching in my throat. "Please," I whispered, "come home." Then, in a voice that barely sounded human, he spoke. "It's not me." My entire body went rigid. "What do you mean?" The voice on the other end shuddered, cracked. "I can see you, but you can't see me." My hands trembled. "Where are you?" A long, excruciating pause. Then, "Behind you." My blood turned to ice. I spun around, but my room was empty. I was alone. And then the line went dead. I left town after that, moved far away, changed my number. But it doesn't matter. He still calls, always at 3:07 a.m., always the same whisper, the same breathing. I don't answer anymore. I can't, because I know it's not him. It never was. And yet, sometimes, when I look out my window late at night, I see a shadow standing across the street, watching, waiting. The calls never stop. The whispers never fade. And every Valentine's night I wake up to a single red rose on my doorstep. Fresh, perfect, as if it was picked just for me. As if he's still trying to come home. But he never will. Because whatever took him, it's still out there. And now, it knows my name. I should be dead. That's the only thing I can think about now. That night plays over and over in my head, each memory sending a cold shiver down my spine. It started like any other online date. I matched with a guy named Daniel, handsome, polite, with just the right mix of charm and mystery. We chatted for a few days before he asked me to meet him at a quiet restaurant on the outskirts of town. I was nervous but excited. I picked out my best dress, curled my hair, and arrived at the restaurant 10 minutes early. The place was dimly lit, with soft jazz playing in the background. I scanned the room expecting to see him waiting at a table, but he wasn't there. I checked my Fonano messages. Maybe he was running late? Minutes passed. Then an hour. Embarrassed, I paid for my untouched drink and left. It felt like a disappointment at the time, just another flake from the internet. But now I know, he never planned to show up. At least, not as my date. Something felt wrong as I walked back to my car. The air was too still. The shadows between the streetlights seemed darker than usual. I could hear my own heels clicking against the pavement, the only sound cutting through the silence. Then I felt it, an unsettling awareness, like someone was watching me. I turned my head, scanning the street, but there was no one. Just the occasional passing car. Maybe I was just being paranoid. Still, I picked up my pace. When I finally reached my car, I fumbled with my keys, my hands shaking for no reason. As soon as I locked the doors, I let out a breath I didn't even realize I was holding. The drive home was quiet. Too quiet. I kept glancing at my rearview mirror, half expecting to see a pair of cold, unfamiliar eyes staring back at me. But the road behind me was empty, just my nerves playing tricks on me. At least, that's what I told myself. Looking back now, I wonder, was he there? Watching me? Waiting? I'll never know. And maybe it's better that way. The next morning, I woke up groggy and disoriented. I had barely slept. That strange, gut-churning feeling from the night before still clung to me. I made coffee and mindlessly scrolled through my phone. That's when I saw it. The headline that made my stomach drop. Suspected serial killer arrested outside local restaurant. My heart stopped. I clicked on the article, my fingers trembling. The details made my blood run cold. A man had been apprehended the night before at the exact restaurant where I was supposed to meet Daniel. He had been waiting for his next victim. My chest tightened as I continued reading. The police had been following him for weeks. He had a pattern, meeting women through dating apps, luring them into isolated places, and then killing them. My vision blurred. I forced myself to read the last line of the article. His name wasn't Daniel. It was something else entirely. A fake identity, a trap I had nearly fallen into. I dropped my phone. My stomach twisted as realization settled in. I was supposed to be his next victim, but by some miracle I wasn't. I couldn't breathe. My hands shook as I grabbed my phone and checked our chat history. The messages felt different now. His compliments, his questions, the way he had subtly guided me into meeting him alone. It was all calculated. Every word, every pause, a carefully crafted web of lies. I felt sick. I had told him things where I lived, what I did for work, my favorite places to visit. He knew so much about me, and worst of all, he knew what I looked like. I ran to the mirror, staring at my own reflection as a terrifying thought crept in. What if he had been watching me that night? What if he had seen me sitting there, waiting for him? I had been alone, vulnerable, the perfect target. My hands gripped the sink as my mind spiraled. If he hadn't been arrested, would I even be here? I could have been another face on the news, another missing woman, another tragic story. A wave of nausea hit me. I needed to do something. I needed to know how close I had come to dying. I grabbed my phone and called the police, my voice barely above a whisper. I think I was supposed to be his next victim. The words felt unreal as I said them. The officer on the other end of the line took me seriously. They asked me questions when I matched with him, what we talked about, how he convinced me to meet him. Every answer made the horror sink in deeper. Then came the question that made my blood freeze. Did you notice anyone watching you last night? My breath caught in my throat. I thought back to that strange feeling I had, the paranoia, the way I had rushed to my car. My stomach dropped. What if he had been there? What if he had been waiting for the perfect moment? The officer assured me that I was safe, that he was in custody. But I didn't feel safe. Not really. Because the truth was there could be others, more like him. More predators hiding behind friendly messages and fake smiles. More victims who wouldn't be as lucky as me. Sleep became impossible. Every creak, every shadow outside my window sent my heart racing. My mind kept replaying what could have happened, the dark possibilities. The news revealed more horrifying details. The police had found disturbing things in his apartment. Trophies from his victims, plans for future ones. They believed I had been next. The thought alone made my skin crawl. I started checking my locks multiple times a night. I deleted all my dating app accounts, terrified of the idea that someone else like him could still be out there. I barely left my house. When I did, I felt like someone was always behind me, lurking, waiting. Rationally, I knew he was gone, but the fear had settled deep inside me. It was no longer just a fear of him. It was a fear of the unknown, of how many others were out there, of how close I had come to never making it home that night. I had escaped, but I didn't feel free. It's been months, but I still think about it every single day. That night changed me. It made me see the world differently. How easy it is to trust the wrong person. How quickly things can go from ordinary to horrifying. I could have been another headline, another girl who disappeared, another name on a list, but I wasn't. And now, all I can do is share my story. Warn others. If you're watching this, please be careful, be skeptical, be aware. If something feels wrong, trust that feeling. I ignored mine, and I barely survived. He had a plan, and I fit perfectly into it. But fate, luck, whatever you want to call it, saved me. This isn't just my story. It's a warning. The monsters aren't just in horror movies. They're real, and they could be waiting, right now, for someone just like you. I should have never opened that package. The moment I saw his name on the label, my stomach twisted into knots. My ex. We hadn't spoken in months, not since the breakup that left me feeling like a hunted animal. I almost threw the package away, but curiosity got the best of me. Inside was a stuffed teddy bear, a sad-looking thing with button eyes and stitched paws. A note was tucked under its arm. "I'm sorry. Let's talk." I wanted nothing to do with him, but the bear itself seemed harmless. That night, As I sat alone in my apartment, I absent-mindedly squeezed it. That's when I felt it. Something hard buried inside the stuffing. My chest tightened. I turned the bear over, running my fingers along its seams. Something wasn't right. My pulse hammered as I grabbed a pair of scissors and sliced it open. Stuffing spilled onto my lap, but hidden deep inside, tangled in wires and tape, was a tiny black device. A camera. My vision blurred. My hands trembled. I had been watched. Every moment in my apartment changing, sleeping, living my life had been invaded, and I had no idea for how long. The realization hit me like a freight train. My ex had been watching me, recording me. Every moment of privacy shattered in an instant. My body went cold as I yanked the device free, my hands shaking so hard I almost dropped it. But then, I noticed something even worse. There was a second device. A small, blinking light buried beneath the stuffing. A GPS tracker. My breath caught in my throat. He knew where I was. He had always known. My mind spiraled into panic. Had he been near me? Outside my building? Watching me from the shadows? I jumped to my feet and ran to the door, locking it, shoving a chair beneath the handle. My phone. I needed my phone. I grabbed it, but just as I started dialing 911, a notification flashed on my screen. A new message. From an unknown number. Like your gift? My stomach lurched. I dropped the phone, my ears ringing with the sound of my own rapid heartbeat. He was watching me. Right now. My apartment, my safe space was no longer mine. I was trapped, and I wasn't alone. I forced myself to breathe. Panicking wouldn't help me. I needed to think. My first instinct was to flee, to get as far away from that apartment as possible. But where would I go? He could track me. My fingers hovered over my phone. Should I call the police? My ex was smart, too smart. He would have covered his tracks. I couldn't afford to wait. I had to act fast. I ripped open my closet, grabbed a duffel bag, and stuffed it with essentials. Clothes, cash, anything I could grab in seconds. I had just slung it over my shoulder when my phone buzzed again. Another message. Going somewhere? My blood ran ice cold. He was watching me. From where? My windows? My hallway? My fingers curled around the kitchen knife on the counter, my only weapon. I turned slowly, my eyes darting across the room. Shadows stretched across the walls. The air felt heavier, thicker, like something unseen was lurking just out of sight. Then, a knock. Soft, slow, deliberate. Right outside my door, my breath caught in my throat. My legs refused to move. The silence was deafening. And then, the doorknob turned. I choked back a scream as I backed away, gripping the knife tighter. The door didn't open, it was locked. But the handle twisted again, this time harder. My knees buckled. He was here. Right outside. My mind raced. Call the police? Hide? Run? The knocking stopped. Silence stretched so long it made my ears ring. And then, the sound of paper sliding under the door. A note. My hands trembled as I picked it up. 3 words. See you soon. A sharp pain shot through my chest. My lungs forgot how to work. I couldn't stay. Not another second. I bolted to the back door, my fingers fumbling with the lock. I flung it open and ran. Into the night. Into the dark. Anywhere but here. Cold air sliced through my skin, but I didn't stop. My feet pounded against the pavement, my heart slamming against my ribs. I didn't know where I was going. I just ran. I turned a corner, my breath ragged, and crashed into someone hard. I screamed. Arms grabbed me. I kicked, struggled until I heard a voice. Hey, it's okay, my neighbor. A flood of relief knocked the air from my lungs, but it didn't last long. Over his shoulder, standing under the dim streetlight, was a figure, watching. My neighbor looked at me, concern etched across his face. Are you okay? You're shaking. I could barely find my voice. Someone, he's watching me. I pointed towards the streetlight. But the figure was gone, vanished, like a nightmare slipping through my fingers. My neighbor grabbed my shoulders. Come inside. Call the police. I nodded, my body moving on autopilot. Inside his apartment, I locked the door behind me, the weight of exhaustion settling over me like a heavy fog. My neighbor handed me his phone. I dialed, my fingers barely pressing the buttons. The dispatcher answered. I told them everything: the bear, the camera, the GPS, the messages. They told me to stay put. An officer was on the way. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. Every creak, every shadow sent a fresh wave of terror down my spine. The minutes dragged. And then, the worst sound yet, a notification. My stomach dropped as I looked at my phone. One new message. A photo. My apartment door. My front door. Someone had been there, just seconds ago. Sirens wailed in the distance, but I didn't feel safe. Not yet. My neighbor stood by the window, watching. "They're almost here," he said, but his voice felt distant, like I was underwater. My mind was unraveling. How long had he been following me? How close had he gotten without me knowing? The police arrived, their presence bringing a fragile sense of security. They took my statement, examined the devices. One officer frowned at the GPS tracker. This was active. Whoever planted it knew exactly where you were. My stomach twisted. They searched the area, checked the security footage, but found nothing. No sign of him. It was like he had disappeared. But I knew better. He wasn't gone. He was waiting, watching. A chilling realization settled over me. He wasn't finished. Not yet. That was 3 months ago. I moved, changed my number, got a new job in another state, but I never feel safe. The police never found him. No arrests, no leads, just silence. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night, sure that someone is watching. Last week, I got a package, no return address. Inside was a stuffed bear. I didn't open it. I burned it. But the fear never left. Because deep down, I know this isn't over. He's still out there. And one day he'll come back. It was the coldest night of the year. The kind of cold that bites through your clothes, that makes your breath come out in thick, ghostly clouds. I was driving down an empty stretch of road, headlights slicing through the thick darkness. The silence was heavy, eerie, pressing in on me from all sides. That's when I saw her. A woman walking alone on the side of the road, wrapped in a thin white dress that fluttered in the freezing wind. Something about her felt wrong. She didn't shiver. She didn't look around. She just walked, like she wasn't even part of this world. But it was Valentine's night, and I couldn't just leave her there. I pulled over, rolling down my window. "Do you need a ride?" I asked hesitantly. She turned her head slowly. Her face was pale, her eyes deep and hollow, but she smiled a soft, almost sad smile. "Yes," she whispered. She slid into the back seat without making a sound. My skin prickled as I caught a faint scent of roses and something else, something old, something decayed. I swallowed hard, gripping the wheel. "Where to?" I asked. Her voice was barely a breath. "Home," she said. Then, she gave me an address. The moment she settled in, the car filled with an unnatural cold. My fingers stiffened around the steering wheel. I glanced at the rearview mirror, trying to shake the unease curling in my gut. Her gaze was fixed on the window, staring at nothing. The radio crackled, distorting the soft hum of static. I cleared my throat. "Cold night, huh?" No answer. I tried again. "You live far?" Silence. Just the sound of the engine and the rhythmic thud of my heart against my ribs. I gritted my teeth and focused on the road, but something gnawed at the back of my mind. Her dress, it didn't make sense. It was too thin for this weather. And her skin, now that I thought about it, was too pale, almost translucent, under the flickering streetlights. My stomach tightened. "You okay back there?" I asked, turning my head slightly. My breath caught in my throat. She wasn't looking out the window anymore. She was staring directly at me through the mirror, her eyes dark, empty, unblinking. My foot pressed harder on the gas. I just wanted to get to the address, get this over with. But deep down, a part of me knew something was very, very wrong. The ride felt endless, though the address was only 10 minutes away. Every second dragged, stretching the silence between us like an open grave. My hands were slick on the wheel, the air thick with something unseen, something suffocating. I forced myself to glance at the mirror again. She was gone. My stomach lurched. I slammed the brakes, the car screeching to a stop. My breath came in short, panicked bursts. I twisted around, scanning the back seat. Empty. My mind raced. Had she jumped out? Had I imagined her? Number, I felt her presence, heard her voice. She was there. I knew she was. My pulse hammered against my skull as I gripped the steering wheel. I needed to get to that house. I needed answers. Shakily, I restarted the car, forcing my way forward through the twisting road. The address was just up ahead, a small, weathered house with dim porch lights barely illuminating the old wooden steps. My heart pounded as I stepped out, the crunch of my boots against the icy ground the only sound in the suffocating silence. I hesitated, then knocked. Once, twice, 3 times. The door creaked open, revealing an old woman, and the moment she saw me, her eyes filled with tears. The woman's gaze flickered past me, her expression frozen in shock. "Where is she?" she whispered. My throat went dry. "She was in my car," I stammered. But then she vanished. The old woman's face crumpled. Her eyes glistened, her lips trembling as if she already knew the answer before she even asked. "What was she wearing?" she murmured. I swallowed hard. "A white dress?" I said. Her knees nearly buckled, and she gripped the doorframe for support. Then, in a voice barely louder than a breath, she said the words that made my blood turn to ice. "My daughter died 10 years ago, on this night, wearing that dress." The room behind her was dimly lit, cluttered with old photographs and fading memories. She turned, shaky fingers pointing toward a framed picture on the table. My legs felt like lead as I stepped inside. My eyes locked onto the photograph. It was her, the woman from my car. The same hollow eyes, the same sad smile. A scream caught in my throat. My mind refused to process it. "That's impossible," I muttered. "I just saw her." The old woman let out a heavy breath. "You're not the first." A chill wrapped around me, colder than the winter air outside. My legs felt weak as the old woman's words sank in. "Not the first." My stomach twisted. "Others have seen her?" I managed to whisper. She nodded, her frail fingers brushing against the photograph. "Every year, every Valentine's night." My pulse roared in my ears. This wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't a mistake. What happened to her? I forced myself to ask. The woman swallowed hard, staring past me, as if she could see the ghost of her daughter standing right there. She was coming home that night, walking down that same road. A car hit her. The driver panicked, left her in the snow. She didn't make it. My breath came in ragged gasps. And now? The woman closed her eyes, a single tear slipping down her wrinkled cheek. "She waits," she whispered, "every year, hoping someone will bring her home." A thick silence filled the room. My fingers curled into my palms. I had picked up a ghost. I had spoken to someone who no longer existed. And worst of all, she had chosen me. I stumbled back, my head spinning. My pulse pounded so hard I could feel it in my throat. "I have to go," I muttered, turning toward the door. The old woman didn't stop me. She just stood there watching, almost like she knew what would happen next. I practically ran to my car, fumbling for the keys. I needed to get as far away from that house as possible. I jammed the key into the ignition, turned it and froze. My breath caught in my chest. My reflection in the rearview mirror was not alone. She was sitting in the back seat, pale, lifeless, her hollow eyes boring into mine. My vision blurred, my lungs squeezed tight, refusing to take in air. Then she spoke, soft, cold, final. "I just wanted to go home." The words barely registered before the world tilted. My body seized. My fingers gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white with terror. The cold wrapped around me like death itself. My vision darkened. And then nothing. I woke up hours later, alone. My car was still running, parked on that same road. My hands trembled as I reached for my phone. But the clock, it hadn't moved. It was still the same time as when I picked her up. Had any of it happened? My mind screamed that it was real. My bones ached with the cold that had seeped into them. And then I noticed it. Something resting on the passenger seat. A single withered red rose. And the scent of something old, something decayed.